Who are likely some of the best IT asset managers on Earth? If you think about it, malware actors. This is because they understand how to quickly differentiate what's at risk among every asset that your organization has. This video will discuss 7 likely soul-crushing disconnects lurking in your IT asset management program today that help malware actors be more successful at inventorying and managing your assets than your own team. You likely have felt the pain of at least some of them, as many of the disconnects are almost systemic, but perhaps haven't been able to articulate why you feel the pain. First, we'll need to quickly establish a taxonomy that separates IT asset composition, or how many assets you may have, from disposition, which is where your assets are, their use, and their state. This roughly matches the initial objectives of malware actors before prioritizing targets. Note that this taxonomy is very different from the IT asset lifecycle, as this taxonomy focuses solely on the disposition of active assets like physical endpoints, installed software, and SaaS applications. Malware actors likely don't care about out-of-service or retired assets. We can start by dividing your organization's active assets into 2 groups, licensed and unlicensed. In the example, the unlicensed asset is marked with a red X. Both licensed and unlicensed assets can be further divided into their deployment status. In the example, we are using in depot and deployed. Your organization might have different names such as inactive or in storage, but assets generally fall into one of these groups while they are being carried on the financial books. Next, we can further subdivide deployed assets into reporting and non-reporting based on the management systems being used. These should be obvious categories, although non-reporting either might be a temporary state or a longer-term state depending on the organization. Just because a given organization doesn't use this disposition category doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Lastly, our reporting assets, and even perhaps non-reporting assets and certainly unlicensed assets, can be deemed to be at risk or not at risk. So there you have the taxonomy that we'll be using for the rest of this video. Active count, licensed, unlicensed, in depot, deployed, non-reporting/reporting, and not at risk, at risk. The taxonomy we're using exposes our first soul-crushing disconnect. Most organizations will have different stakeholder audiences, with differing and sometimes conflicting concerns and reporting requirements at each disposition state. The financial stakeholders likely want to know the counts that impact spend. IT stakeholders more probably want to know what's licensed, deployed, and reporting. And your InfoSec and risk teams probably are on the far end of the spectrum wanting information about the cyber risks. Starting on the left of the diagram, we'll find no shortage of tools claiming to help with IT asset management that very successfully count hardware, installed software, and with less popularity because of more expense, SaaS applications. That said, many IT service management applications are also being dual-hatted for IT asset management tasks, but are far more focused on counting only hardware. Many either don't track installed software at all, or track software as a monolithic single inventory outside of a formal CMDB, which is why hardware centricity is the second soul-crushing disconnect. We'll see in a second why the software inventory becomes more important next, but suffice it to say that many IT asset management programs maintain a very hardware-centric inventory. The third soul-crushing disconnect is asset focus. At the right of the diagram, we see InfoSec teams grappling with cyber risk almost exclusively facilitated by software rather than the hardware itself. Sure, as security practitioners, we tend to assign the risk to a countable physical endpoint, but the risk itself is in the software, or firmware, which is software. Hardware is just easier to count. There is a complexity to managing software that doesn't exist with hardware. For example, software may have multiple versions across the organization. These versions can be spread across the entire taxonomy. Some versions might be licensed but not deployed. Some versions of the same application might be deployed but not reporting. And some might be reporting and at risk, while other versions of the same application may not be at risk at all. It's difficult for simple asset inventory solutions to track software, so many simply don't, particularly those designed for service management rather than true asset management. Hardware and software assets may require different prioritizations, which is the fourth soul-crushing disconnect. Different asset types require independent prioritizations across cost and risk, with some of these prioritizations having complex many-to-many relationships. Which prioritization is more correct? If there isn't communication and coordination across the teams, the answer might well be none of them. Now let's look at the center of the disposition spectrum. Auto-discovery is generally the approach used to identify what assets are deployed and reporting or not reporting. Auto-discovery tools tend to be focused on identifying new hardware on the network and, at some significant expense, SaaS applications. We can also find auto-discovery apps for virtual assets in the cloud platform space, but that is outside the scope of this video. Looking across the taxonomy, what we see are point solutions, which is the fifth soul-crushing disconnect. So, many organizations can expect a veritable cornucopia of tools that each perform some processing reporting in their area and usually don't have clean or normalized data to compare against other tool reporting. Anyone that has worked in IT asset management knows that different tools tend to provide different inventories, if only because of different reporting statuses. For most organizations, the different toolsets produce output that doesn't feed into a cogent view of the IT asset landscape. This fact is exacerbated by the different focus areas and prioritizations required throughout the taxonomy. Therefore, different teams end up having to work from their own inventories without a single source of truth, blind to, or even sometimes ignoring anomalous data across the collective results, comprises soul-crushing disconnect number 6. Meanwhile, the malware actors take advantage of those very same anomalies to find those outlier assets without visibility or controls coverage. The seventh soul-crushing disconnect is the license cost if an organization wants comprehensive visibility. There are only a few tools that take all of these disconnects and manage them well. The most well-known isn't just soul-crushing. It comes with an eye-watering price tag just for the licenses and multiple modules. You likely know the one. Most of the IT asset managed services use that same solution, so many organizations may be priced out of comprehensive IT asset managed services. That said, Governisto has developed proprietary technology wrapped in a managed service that democratizes the availability of a high-end and comprehensive managed service, normalizes cost and risk reporting requirements across engineering and executive stakeholders at a much more reasonable price point. We'll leverage your existing tools and ITSM vendors to squeeze more value out of what you already have in place. We've also built it to integrate with any existing data protection and cyber risk programs that you may have. Don't miss out! We're providing managed services to some of the most fast-growing and dynamic companies out there. Let's do a deeper dive into your program and how we can help. Contact us today through our website at governisto.com or send an email to schedule a conversation at contactus@governisto.com.